everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about serial killers.
Oh, wow.
And specifically, we're going to be looking at Wikipedia's list of serial killers by number of victims.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a pretty fascinating source.
Yeah.
Really gives you a sense of the scope of, the impact these individuals have had.
Right. Yeah, just like the sheer scale of it all.
Exactly. And,
Right.
we're going to be focusing specifically on serial killers as they're defined by this list. So
Okay.
we're not talking about, like, mass murderers, who kill a bunch of people at once. Or
Right.
spree killers who kill multiple people over a short period.
Gotcha.
It's specifically those individuals who kill over a long period with a cooling off period.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction, I think.
For sure. Each category has, like, its own psychology and sociological factors.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so let's jump into this list, okay? So
Okay.
at the very top,
Mm-hmm.
we have a name that might not be familiar to all of you.
Yeah.
Luis Garavito,
Luis Garavito.
also known as La Bestia, which means the beast.
Ooh.
Yeah, he was a Colombian child murderer.
Oh, my gosh.
He confessed to killing 140 boys,
Wow. 140?
but investigators think he might have had over 300 victims.
That's just unbelievable.
Oh, right? Absolutely staggering.
And what makes it even more disturbing is his sentence.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
He was originally sentenced to like 1,853 years.
Oh, my God.
But
it's crazy.
They got reduced to just 22
22.
in exchange for helping authorities find the bodies of his victims.
Wow. So 22 years for potentially hundreds of murders.
Yeah, it's tough.
That's a tough pill to swallow, Like, it
Yeah.
really makes you think about justice
For sure.
and the compromises that are made in these cases.
Absolutely balancing justice for the victims and closure for the families while also trying to hold the killer accountable.
Right. And the thing is, Garavito died just last year, 2023.
Wow.
Yeah, so now he's gone.
Hmm.
Okay, so moving on to number 2 on the list. We have Pedro Lopez, nicknamed the Monster of the Andes.
Oof, that's creepy.
I know, right? He targeted young girls mostly in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, and he's officially linked to over 110 victims.
Over 110.
But he claimed to have killed hundreds more.
Hundreds more.
Yeah, and get this. He was released in the late 1990s.
What? Crazy, right?
It's terrifying he could still be out there.
I know. It's really hard to imagine the lack of closure for the families.
I know, it is really,
Yeah.
it is, and it also highlights the difficulties in tracking and prosecuting serial killers when they operate across borders.
Right. Different countries, different laws.
Exactly.
Sometimes it feels like they're always one step ahead.
Yeah, it's tough.
All right, so in our third spot, we have Javed Iqbal,
Javed Iqbal. Okay.
a Pakistani child murderer known as Kukri.
Kukri.
He murdered 100 street children and confessed to dissolving their bodies in acid.
Oh my gosh, dissolving the bodies in acid, that is chilling.
I know, right? It really adds a whole other level of horror to it.
Right.
Yeah, it speaks to the premeditation and the desire to just completely obliterate any trace of their existence.
It's like he was trying to erase them completely.
Right.
And the judge, in his case, actually intended for his execution to mirror his crimes,
Really?
but Iqbal died in custody before that could happen.
Wow.
Before we move on, it's super important to note that these numbers are just the proven victims
Right.
because officially linked to each killer.
The true number is often debated.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're likely only seeing the tip of the iceberg here.
For sure, there could be many more victims out there, undiscovered, or their deaths attributed to other causes.
Yeah, it's a truly disturbing thought.
It is.
But so we've looked at the top 3,
Yeah,
but there's so much more to this list.
I bet. And as we go down the list, I think we'll see some fascinating patterns emerge.
Oh, for sure. Like, for example, certain professions being overrepresented among serial killers.
Oh, yeah, like healthcare workers.
Exactly. It's so interesting, isn't it?
It is. It really makes you think.
It does, like, about the nature of evil.
Yeah. Is it something you're born with? Is it because of your circumstances?
Those are the questions that have puzzled people for centuries.
And there are no easy answers.
Nope.
But by examining the lives and crimes of these individuals, maybe we can understand what drives them a little bit better.
Yeah, maybe get a little closer to understanding the darkness.
Exactly.
So with that in mind,
Okay.
let's take a closer look at some of these other categories.
Sounds good.
Starting with medical professionals who turn to murder.
Okay.
It's a dark path, but a fascinating one.
It is fascinating.
So let's dive in. So we were talking about how certain professions seem to attract more serial killers, like healthcare.
Yeah. It's a scary thought.
It is. What do you think it is about healthcare that leads to this?
Well, they have access,
Yeah,
to vulnerable people,
right.
often in isolated settings.
Makes sense.
Plus, they have knowledge of drugs and anatomy,
Right.
and it's easy to disguise their actions as like routine medical care.
Yeah, it's like a perfect storm of opportunity.
Sadly, yeah.
And probably the most notorious example of this is Harold Shipman,
Oh, yeah.
a British doctor.
Dr. Dev.
That's the one. He's considered like the world's most prolific serial killer,
Wow.
with 218 proven victims. But it's probably way more than that.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, he preyed on elderly patients, injecting them with lethal doses of diamorphine.
Which is a powerful painkiller.
Right.
Wow. That's...
I know it's hard to even grasp the scale of his crimes.
It is, and that he went undetected for so long.
Yeah, like how do you catch someone like that?
It really shows how important oversight is.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the medical profession. Absolutely accountability, too.
For sure. And it makes you think about how we can protect vulnerable people better.
Yeah, especially from those who abuse their power.
Scary to think about.
It is.
It is.
Evil can be anywhere.
For sure. And that actually reminds me of another category.
What kind?
Serial killer couples.
Oh, yeah.
The idea of two people, sharing that darkness.
Sharing that darkness, yeah, and like working together to commit these crimes.
It's like a horror movie.
It is.
You'd think having a partner would make you less likely to do something like that.
Yeah, you think so, right?
Right. But for some couples, it seems to have the opposite effect.
It's really a complex dynamic.
It is.
Some experts think that one partner might be manipulating the other,
Right.
while others say it's a shared delusion.
Oh.
Like a folie à deux, where they feed off each other's darkness.
Like they create their own little world.
Yeah, their own twisted reality.
And one of the most infamous examples of this is Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck,
Oh, yeah, I've heard of them.
the Lonely Hearts Killers.
Right. They use personal ads to lure women in.
And then they would rob and murder them.
Together.
They were caught and executed in 1951.
1951.
It's crazy to think about what goes on in the minds of these couples.
A whole other realm of psychology.
For sure. Okay, so we talked about the top of the list and now this category of couples. But as we go down the list, into the 15 to 30 victim range,
Okay.
we start to see more female serial killers.
Really?
Yeah, it's interesting, right?
That is interesting.
It really challenges the stereotype of the male serial killer.
Absolutely.
Why do you think that is?
Why is it opportunity?
Mm-hmm.
Are their methods just different? Or maybe there's a societal bias where we just don't suspect women of these crimes as much.
That's a good point.
It's definitely something to consider.
It is, and one example of this is Juana Barraza,
Juana Barraza.
a Mexican wrestler.
Whoa.
Yeah.
A wrestler.
Yeah. She was convicted of killing elderly women.
Wow, so the old lady killer.
Yep. And it's interesting because she was known for her strength and aggression in the ring. And then she used those same traits in her crimes.
That's wild.
It really makes you wonder.
It does.
Like, was it all connected?
Right, like could she even separate those two parts of herself?
And then there's Vera Renzi,
Vera Renzi, okay.
Black Widow.
Oh, yeah, from Romania.
That's her. She poisoned over 35 men,
35 men.
including her 2 husbands and her son.
Oh, my goodness.
It's cold-blooded.
It is.
What was her motive?
We don't really know. Her case is a bit of a mystery.
Really?
Some people even think she might be more of a legend than a real person.
Oh, wow.
It just goes to show that history can be incomplete.
Especially when it comes to female serial killers.
Yeah, their stories are often lost or distorted.
Makes you wonder what else we're missing.
Right, what other stories haven't been told?
Okay, so something else that I noticed as we go down this list is that a lot of serial killers target marginalized groups.
You're right.
Like sex workers, homeless individuals, runaways.
People who are overlooked.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're more vulnerable, and their disappearances aren't always investigated as thoroughly.
It's a sad reality.
It is.
And it really highlights the inequalities in our society.
Absolutely. It makes you think about how we can better protect these communities.
For sure, we need to do more. Okay, so we've talked about some of the broader trends, but I want to look at some specific cases in this 15 to 30 victim range.
Okay.
One that stands out is John Wayne Gacy.
Oh, gosh, yeah, the killer clown.
That's the one. He was active in his community,
Right.
dressed up as a clown for kids' parties.
Oh, no, it's so creepy.
It's terrifying.
It is.
And all the while, he was murdering young men and boys and burying them under his house.
Yeah, his case really shook people up.
It did.
It showed that this kind of evil could be lurking anywhere,
Yeah, even in seemingly normal places.
like right under our noses.
It makes you think about the importance of paying attention.
To those little signs.
Exactly, like neighbors reported weird smells and sounds coming from his house.
But nobody really did anything.
Not until it was too late.
Ugh, it's heartbreaking.
It is. Okay, another one that comes to mind is Anatoly Onoprienko,
Anatoly Onoprienko.
the beast of Ukraine.
Right.
His crimes were brutal.
They were.
He would murder entire families with axes or firearms.
And we don't even know why.
Right, his motive is still a mystery.
And he traveled all over Europe.
So who knows how many more victims there are?
It's a chilling thought.
It does. It
Yeah.
makes you wonder what could drive someone to that level of violence.
Is it trauma? Societal unrest? Or just something dark inside them?
Maybe we'll never know.
Maybe not.
But maybe by trying to understand, we can prevent future tragedies.
I hope so.
Me too.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the top of the list and now this 15 to 30 victim range.
Right.
But as we move down even further
Okay.
to the 5 to 14 victim range,
Right.
the list just explodes with names.
Wow. So many.
It's overwhelming.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is.
It shows how pervasive serial killing is
You're right.
all over the world throughout history.
Yeah, it's not a rare phenomenon.
Not at all.
We need to keep researching and educating ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we can understand it better and hopefully prevent it.
Okay, so with so many names in this range,
Yeah.
where do we even begin?
Well, let's try to focus on the cases that offer unique insights or challenge what we think we know about serial killers.
Okay, so one that comes to mind is Richard Ramirez,
Richard Ramirez.
the Night Stalker,
Oh, yeah. He terrorized Los Angeles.
back in the mid-'80s.
Home invasions, rapes, murders.
Yep.
What's interesting about him is that he didn't seem to have a type.
Right, like his victims were random.
Exactly. Anyone could have been a target.
That's terrifying.
It is. And his case also shows the power of forensic science.
Right.
He left fingerprints and stuff that eventually led to his arrest.
Even the most careful criminals make mistakes.
They do.
Okay, and speaking of elusive killers,
Oh, yeah.
we have to talk about the Zodiac Killer.
The Zodiac Killer.
He was active in Northern California in the late 60s, early 70s,
Right?
and we still don't know who he is.
A mystery.
A total mystery.
It's like he outsmarted everyone.
It's kind of like a real-life horror movie where the villain wins.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It makes you wonder how many other serial killers are out there that we haven't caught.
Yeah, it's definitely a sobering thought.
It is. It reminds us that this list is just a small piece of a much bigger picture,
For sure.
and we can't ignore it.
We need to keep learning and studying so we can prevent more tragedies.
Well said. Okay, so we've explored the top of the list, this couple's category, and the 5 to 14 victim range.
Okay.
But there's one last section we haven't talked about.
Which is?
Killers with fewer than 5 proven victims.
Oh, wow.
And I think it's important that we don't dismiss these cases
Right.
just because the numbers are smaller.
I agree.
Each life lost is a tragedy.
It is.
And these cases can be even harder to solve.
Yeah, because there's less information to work with.
Exactly. And sometimes these cases might represent the early stages of a killer's career.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah, like we're catching them before they've fully developed their methods.
It's like a glimpse into the making of a monster.
It's chilling, but it highlights how important early intervention is.
Yeah, we need to catch them before they can hurt more people.
So let's look at a couple of examples from this section. What about Alexander Spissovtsev,
Alexander Spissovtsev.
the Novokuznetsk monster?
Oh, wow.
He was officially linked to 4 victims.
But there was evidence suggesting many more.
Right. Like
Yeah.
those 82 sets of bloody clothes.
Oh, yeah, and the jewelry, the photographs.
It's horrifying.
It is.
And he was diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Right.
So it makes you think about the role of mental illness in these cases.
Yeah, was it a factor or just an explanation after the fact?
It's a complicated issue.
It is.
Mental illness isn't always a simple explanation.
Definitely not.
It's usually a lot of factors combined.
It's psychological, social, environmental.
It's hard to separate them.
It really is. Each case is different.
Okay. And then we have cases like the Highway of Tears murders in Canada.
Oh, right.
So many murders and disappearances along that remote highway.
Mostly indigenous women.
Yeah, it's a tragedy that's haunted Canada for decades.
It has, and it's still unsolved.
Right. At least 18 victims potentially linked to one or more killers.
It's hard to imagine what the families are going through.
The lack of closure must be unbearable.
Unsolved cases are really tough.
They are. They leave so many questions unanswered.
Yeah, it's not just the grief, but the uncertainty, too.
Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah,
I want to remind everyone that this list is just a snapshot.
you're right.
It doesn't tell the whole story.
It's just a small glimpse into a much bigger reality.
Exactly, and there are countless other cases out there.
Some documented, some not.
And the true number of serial killings is probably way higher than we can imagine.
Probably.
So this isn't just about morbid curiosity
Oh, it's a real issue.
with real consequences.
And we need to keep learning about it.
Absolutely. If you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to do your own research.
Yeah. Find reliable sources.
And remember the victims.
Yes, their stories matter.
There are organizations out there supporting the families and fighting for justice.
Their work is really important.
So after this deep dive into this dark world,
Yeah.
I have one final question for everyone listening.
What's that?
What does this all tell us about evil? Is it something we're born with?
Or is it something we learn?
It's a question that's been around forever.
It has.
And there's no easy answer.
But I think it's important to keep asking.
Yeah, maybe by understanding the darkness, we can find some light.
Maybe we can find a way to prevent these tragedies from happening.
And on that note,
Okay.
we're going to wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive.
Great talking with you.
You too. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring.
And remember those human stories.
The human stories behind the headlines.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're looking at the killers with less than 5 proven victims.
Right, yeah.
And, it would be easy to kind of just dismiss these cases.
Yeah, you might think they're not as important.
Exactly. But I think that's dangerous.
It is.
Every life matters,
Absolutely.
And I think these cases can be even more difficult to solve.
Oh, definitely.
You have fewer data points for investigators to work with.
It's harder to establish patterns.
Right. It's like a puzzle with only a few pieces.
Exactly. And, in some cases, this could be like the beginning of a killer's career.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Before they've really honed their methods.
Like we're seeing the early stages.
Yeah, kind of like a monster in its infancy.
That's a chilling thought.
It is.
But it does highlight how important it is to catch these guys early.
Absolutely. Early intervention is key.
So let's look at some examples from this part of the list.
Okay.
What about Alexander Spivtsev?
The Novokuznetsk monster.
Yeah, that's him. He was officially linked to 4 victims.
Right, but there was evidence suggesting way more.
Right. Like all those bloody clothes.
Yeah, 82 sets of them.
And the jewelry photographs.
Oh, yeah?
And then he was diagnosed with schizophrenia.
So it makes you think about the role of mental illness.
Yeah, for sure. Like, was that a fact?
Or just an explanation after he got caught.
It's a tough question.
It is. It's never just one thing.
Exactly. There's always a mix of things going on.
Psychological, social, environmental.
It's all connected.
It really is.
Okay, and then you have cases like the Highway of Tears murders in Canada.
Oh, gosh.
Just a series of disappearances and murders along that highway.
Most of the victims were Indigenous women.
It's been unsolved for decades.
Yeah, and it just highlights the systemic issues of violence against Indigenous women.
Absolutely. And the challenges of investigating in remote areas.
It's hard to find evidence.
And witnesses.
Like the terrain itself is working against you.
And then for the families, it's just devastating.
I can't even imagine the lack of closure.
Yeah, unsolved cases are just so difficult.
They really are.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that this list, it's just a starting point
Yeah, it's just a glimpse.
into something much bigger.
And darker.
Exactly. There are so many other cases out there.
That we don't even know about.
And the true scale of serial killing is probably way beyond what we can imagine.
It's a disturbing thought.
It is.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that this isn't just some morbid fascination. This
Yeah.
is a real issue.
That affects real people.
And we need to understand it.
We do, so we can hopefully prevent it.
Absolutely. So to anyone listening, if you're interested in learning more,
Please do your own research.
find good sources and,
Remember the victims.
don't forget about the victims.
Their stories matter.
There are organizations out there supporting their families and advocating for justice.
Yeah, their work is so important.
Yeah.
So, after this deep dive into this dark world,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to leave you with one last thought.
Okay.
What does this all tell us about the nature of evil?
Wow.
Is it something inherent?
Or is it a product of our experiences?
It's a question that has haunted us for centuries.
I know.
And there are no easy answers.
Not at all.
But I think it's important to keep asking these questions,
I agree.
to keep searching for understanding.
Yeah, maybe by confronting the darkness, we can find some light.
And on that note,
Yeah.
I think we're going to wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me. It was great talking with you. Until next time, everyone,
Stay curious.
keep exploring
And remember the human
the
stories.
human stories behind the headlines.